take a moment to remember exactly why Ghislaine Maxwell is sitting in prison tonight. After a month-long trial, a jury found her guilty of 5 separate counts. Do you remember what they were? Sex trafficking of a minor, sex trafficking conspiracy, conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex acts, conspiracy to transport minors to participate in illegal sex acts, and transporting a minor to participate in illegal sex acts. Prosecutors say those crimes were not a one-off. They spanned a decade, and the victims were as young as 14 years old. And that Maxwell herself identified vulnerable girls who are typically from single-parent, lower-income households. This is the woman who is looking to get her conviction overturned.
Unlock the darkest stories and unravel the mysteries with Dark Crime Box. Subscribe now and step inside the world of true crime like never before.
The first sound is not a scream. It is a door sealing shut, air displaced, time rerouted. A life once organized around access and influence compresses into a rectangle of concrete where days arrive already counted. The routine is described as simple, almost humane. That word hides how simplicity can become a weapon. When nothing changes, the mind has nowhere to run. Before the cell, there was a household built on hierarchy and obligation. A family name treated like armor. Expectations stacked quietly, never questioned, always obeyed. Control was not loud, it was procedural. Money flowed like oxygen, invisible until threatened. Resentments never argued their way out. They were archived, labeled, and buried beneath schedules and favors. The warning signs lived in plain sight because they wore manners. Boundaries blurred into logistics. People became assets. Silence learned to behave. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story is reaching. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. More intense true crime stories are coming soon. The justifications did not arrive as confessions. They assembled slowly, piece by piece, until they felt like architecture. Loyalty reframed as duty, access reframed as opportunity, harm reframed as inevitability. The mind learned to subtract consequences and call it strategy. Each compromise made the next one easier, smaller, easier again. Secrecy stopped being a risk and started feeling like proof of competence. When the inevitable arrived, it did not explode. It condensed. Courtrooms drained color from memory. Names hardened into exhibits. The past, once curated, became fixed. Then came transport intake, the inventory of a body no longer protected by status. Clothing exchanged. Identity flattened into a number. The door closed with a sound that refuses to echo. Morning arrives the same way every day. Light at a prescribed angle. Count. Movement allowed, then withdrawn. Meals that arrive without ceremony, engineered to be forgettable. A walk measured by steps that never change. Exercise that keeps the body busy while the mind circles. Reading becomes a survival tactic, not an escape. Writing becomes a mirror no one else will read. The routine is simple because complexity would offer relief. Other inmates do not need introductions. They read posture, they listen to silence. Reputation travels faster than footsteps and settles heavier than locks. Reactions are rarely spoken. A turn back, a pause that lasts a second too long. Protection exists, but it is thin and conditional. The loudest punishments are the ones no guard records. Isolation stretches, days flatten into weeks, weeks lose their edges. The mind begins to narrate itself, replaying decisions with forensic patience. Not remorse at first, accounting, what worked, what failed, where control slipped. Then the accounting corrodes, numbers turn into faces. Systems turn into memories that refuse to file themselves away. Sleep shortens, dreams lengthen. Routine becomes a metronome for decay. The same corridor, the same bench, the same sky framed by wire. Time is no longer something to spend, it is something that spends you. The body adapts faster than the ego. Muscles learn the schedule. Pride does not. Pride lingers, insisting on relevance, then dissolves in increments too small to notice until it is gone. Letters arrive and stop arriving. News reaches the cell in fragments distorted by distance and delay. Outside life continues without permission. Inside, the walls learn you're breathing. The cell does not argue, it waits. Reflection turns predatory when there is nowhere to hide from it. The past stops feeling like a story and starts behaving like gravity. There is no redemption built into the routine, only repetition. The quiet enforces honesty by exhaustion. The mind searches for shortcuts and finds none. The simplicity tightens. The door remains closed. And somewhere between count and lights out, the final illusion fails, not with drama but with a slow acceptance that the secrets did not just grow. They chose their home. Night does not fully arrive inside a prison. It hovers. Lights dim but never disappear, leaving the room suspended in a gray half-state where sleep feels temporary and thoughts feel permanent. The body lies still while the mind continues its private audit, replaying the long chain of small decisions that once seemed harmless because they were surrounded by approval. The routine resumes before reflection can finish. Count, breakfast, movement along corridors that never surprise anyone, familiar footsteps, familiar faces. The monotony begins to change shape. At first it felt oppressive. Now it begins to feel surgical, cutting away distractions until only memory remains. Without meetings, schedules, or influence, the mind is forced to confront a question it once avoided. Who remains when usefulness disappears? Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story is reaching. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. More intense true crime stories are coming soon. Outside relationships begin to thin. Support that once sounded unconditional becomes cautious, then distant. Legal language replaces emotional language. Public sympathy, once carefully managed, evaporates in the presence of facts that no longer bend. Even silence from former allies becomes a form of communication. Absence speaks clearly inside a place where time is abundant. Among inmates, status reorganizes itself into something unfamiliar. Wealth and connections lose their currency. What matters here is predictability, how someone behaves when no advantage can be gained. Watching replaces conversation. People learn each other through habits. Who eats quickly, who reads constantly, who avoids eye contact, who never seems to sleep. Trust is not offered. It is calculated slowly, then rarely used. Some days bring whispers, news from outside, appeals filed, motions denied, stories in newspapers. The fragments reach the cell like distant weather reports, reminding everyone that another world still moves forward. Each update arrives with a brief surge of anticipation followed by the return of routine, the emotional equivalent of stepping onto a moving walkway that never reaches an exit. Guilt does not arrive as a single overwhelming wave. It seeps in through unexpected openings. A photograph remembered too clearly, a name overheard, a sentence from a legal document that describes past actions with clinical precision. The mind attempts resistance at first, building defenses out of rationalization and old narratives, but repetition weakens those defenses. When there is nothing new to think about, the same memories gain sharper edges. Sleep becomes negotiation. Some nights pass quietly. Others stretch into long corridors of awareness where every small sound feels amplified. Distant doors, metal against metal, footsteps that fade before reaching the cell. In those hours, the imagination stops inventing the future and begins reconstructing the past in uncomfortable detail. Faces once treated as background characters step forward. Their expressions change when viewed without the protection of distance. The routine remains simple. That simplicity continues its quiet work. Meals arrive, trays are collected, recreation ends, lights dim again. Each repetition removes another layer of denial, not dramatically but steadily, like water wearing down stone. The realization grows that punishment is not only the sentence measured in years, it is the daily requirement to exist with uninterrupted awareness. Some inmates develop strategies to survive the mental weight: exercise, religion, study, strict adherence to schedules even stricter than the institution's own. Others retreat inward, conserving energy, speaking less each week. The difference becomes visible over time. One approach fights the erosion. The other allows it, slowly fading into routine until days feel interchangeable. Occasionally, a reminder of the outside world arrives in the form of a new arrival, someone recently processed, still carrying the noise of freedom in their posture. Their uncertainty spreads through the unit for a few hours, breaking the monotony, then settles as they learn the same rhythms everyone else follows. The system absorbs them quickly. It always does. As months pass, the most unsettling change is not fear or anger. It is familiarity. The one salient environment becomes recognizable, almost predictable, and that predictability carries its own quiet terror. When confinement begins to feel ordinary, the mind recognizes how easily it can adapt to limits that once seemed unimaginable. And in that realization, another illusion disappears: the belief that control was ever permanent. Time inside does not advance forward so much as it erodes sideways. Seasons change outside the walls, but inside the air remains regulated, the light remains institutional, and the calendar loses its authority. Days are remembered not by dates, but by subtle shifts in mood, by the slow thinning of emotional resistance. The body settles into compliance faster than the mind. Muscles learn the exact distance of permitted walks. Hands memorize the texture of metal rails and plastic trays. The voice, once used strategically, becomes quieter, economical. Silence grows heavier because it is no longer imposed. It is chosen. Speaking risks exposure, and exposure has consequences that never make the incident log. The past begins to reorganize itself without permission, not as a narrative of events but as a sequence of missed interruptions. Moments where something could have stopped, moments when someone looked away, moments when power made discomfort seem irrelevant. These recollections do not accuse at first. They observe. Observation turns out to be more damaging. Control once came from anticipation, knowing what people wanted before they asked. Inside, anticipation becomes useless. Nothing here responds to influence. Requests are processed or denied without explanation. The absence of leverage creates a strange panic, a low-grade, persistent awareness that the skills once relied upon have no application. Identity starts to collapse when its tools are removed. Other inmates notice the change long before it is acknowledged internally. The posture softens, the gaze drifts, the careful separation between inner and outer life thins. Reactions become slower. Where there was once calculation, there is now delay. In this environment, delay reads as weakness, and weakness attracts attention even when no one speaks. Punishment rarely arrives dramatically. It accumulates through subtraction. Fewer letters, fewer visits, fewer reasons to mark time. The world outside continues to narrate the story without input, reshaping memory into something fixed and unchangeable. Each headline, when it arrives, feels like a sealed judgment rather than information. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story is reaching. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. More intense true crime stories are coming soon. At night, the mind searches for exits that do not exist. It rehearses explanations no one will hear. It reconstructs loyalty as something that was misunderstood rather than misplaced. But the arguments grow tired. Repetition strips them of conviction. Eventually, the justifications no longer defend. They simply repeat, hollowed out by overuse. The routine tightens its grip precisely because it never changes. There is no crisis to focus on, no emergency to absorb attention, only continuity. Continuity forces introspection, and introspection, when unstructured, becomes corrosive. The self is examined without distraction, and what remains feels smaller each time. Somewhere in the long middle of the sentence, far from the beginning and too distant from the end, the most unsettling realization forms. Not fear of remaining years, not anger at loss, but the recognition that the story no longer belongs to its subject. Meaning has been assigned externally. Legacy has been finalized without consent. The cell absorbs this awareness without comment. Walls do not respond to reflection. They simply contain it. Another count arrives. Another tray slides through the slot. Another day completes itself without ceremony. And in the quiet space between routine and sleep, the mind accepts what it has been resisting. This is not an interruption of life. This is the shape it has taken. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story is reaching. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. More intense true crime stories are coming soon.